You finally graduated, you got a real paycheck coming in, and unfortunately, a student loan balance that feels very overwhelming. You're hearing a lot of advice: pay aggressively, go for forgiveness, refinance, or just pay the minimums and hope it all works out. And the truth is, making the wrong move in these first few years can cost you tens of thousands of dollars.
And the real problem isn't that you don't care about your loans, it's that most healthcare professionals were never taught how student loans actually work after graduation. You go from being broke in school to earning real money overnight, and lifestyle inflation quietly becomes the biggest threat to getting ahead.
In this episode, we're breaking down a simple, realistic framework for paying off student loans after graduation. The same approach Devon and I used to pay off $175,000 in a year between the two of us.
By the end of this episode, you'll know exactly how to approach repayment, whether debt, Snowball, or Avalanche makes sense for you, how to avoid the biggest mistakes we see new grads make, and how to use your early career years to completely change your financial future.
Welcome to the Fiscal Clinician Podcast, where we empower healthcare professionals to build wealth, crush debt, and achieve financial independence. I'm your host, Schien.
And I'm Devon, McCord, your co-host. We're both physical therapists and financial coaches, and today we're diving into how to start paying student loans the right way after graduation. In our last episode, we covered some tips for navigating the healthcare professional loan process and provided some budgeting considerations during graduate school. And today, we're going to discuss tackling loans after graduation. So what are the options? Well, to be honest, your biggest and best option is to keep living like you're in graduate school, living on much less than you make and paying your loans down very aggressively. This is the way both Josh and I paid off such a large amount of debt, and we didn't get any assistance from any programs.
Yeah, I think the danger after graduation isn't low income. It's honestly lifestyle inflation more than anything. Because even if you're making the lower end of a PT salary, you're still, most of the time, if you're living in a decent area, doing totally fine. But when your spending grows just as fast or faster than your paycheck, your progress stalls on your debt and your student loans. And so instead of rewarding yourself with big upgrades like a new car, keep the momentum going when you finish school. Don't try to fall into these traps of rewarding yourselves and buying these extravagant purchases. Because again, when you've already built the discipline of living on very little in school, whether it's undergrad or graduate school, it's the easiest time to get ahead and just continuing this lifestyle. If you've just graduated, this is not to say that you shouldn't celebrate. Graduating from either undergrad or a graduate program is a very amazing and significant milestone. And so go out to a nice dinner, do a cheap vacation, go on a camping trip. We don't want you to miss a reason to celebrate, but we also don't want you to use this milestone as an excuse to go into even more debt.
Yeah, exactly. And graduating from any healthcare graduate program is such an amazing accomplishment that you should indeed celebrate. It is such a huge change in your career path and a huge increase in money to your pocket. So once you've celebrated, we think it's best to get serious about your new financial responsibilities as soon as possible.
Yeah, and once you start the process of paying down your loans, we want to talk about the main strategies in the financial world for paying down loans. And these main two and popular strategies are utilizing either the debt snowball or the debt avalanche for decreasing your student loans.
The debt snowball means you pay off your smallest loan amount first, instead of tackling the loan with the highest interest rate first. So then you're going to roll that minimum payment into the next smallest loan. And basically, these small loans payments will bring a lot of quick wins and motivation, which will ultimately start to initiate good money habit behaviors. The next one is the debt avalanche. The debt avalanche means you focus on the loan with the highest interest rate first, which saves you more money in the long run. However, we feel the biggest loan can sometimes bring on feelings of anxiety and worry, which is also why you can calm your nervous system with a strict loan repayment plan.
Yeah, and there's really not a right or wrong answer. People will, I feel like, often fight tooth and nail about like what the better strategy is, and it's very person dependent. Both the snowball and the avalanche can work really great for reducing debt. It just matters that honestly you pick one and you start the plan and stay consistent. So don't wait to start, but start as soon as possible. And the real key is just keep that momentum going from graduation. Keep living that lifestyle you were living before you graduated when you didn't have a whole lot of income. Now, in my experience with clients, I feel like the debt snowball has worked pretty well overall because it gives people a big sense of accomplishment that you can see once you complete a loan, you finish that loan, you can check it off. Sometimes we'll do like the strike through thing on Excel and it's super satisfying. So that is one way to go about it. Mathematically, the Avalanche has the potential to save you more money on interest, but the devil's advocate says with the debt snowball, by knocking out those smaller loans first, you kind of build that momentum and it gives you those quick wins and confidence. And since money is just as much about behavior as it is math, those wins can really help you pay off that debt faster at times. So let's use a concrete example with both the Avalanche and the Snowball to understand what might be best for you. We're just going to use two loans because it's a little easier to understand listening, but you can basically use these ideas for lots of different loans. And so imagine you have two loans. Loan A is $5,000 at a 5% interest rate, and loan B is $10,000 at a 7% interest rate. Now, if you were doing the debt snowball, that method would tell you, hey, let's focus on loan A because it's smaller. It has the smaller balance between the two. And you want to focus on that. Once you finish the $5,000, then the minimum payment that was going towards the loan A initially and the full payment can go now into loan B, then you finish with loan B. Now, the debt avalanche would tell you, hey, first, since the loan B is $10,000 at 7%, since it has the higher interest rate, you want to focus on this loan first, take that down since mathematically that makes more sense. And then the second one is focusing on the $5,000 at 5% loan A. Now, the biggest issue I think with the Avalanche can come when you have a really massive loan that has a higher interest rate among several other loans. So let's say you had like 6 loans, but one of those loans is maybe like $50,000 at 7%. It's a higher interest rate. What's challenging about this is you're on that loan for so long, it's hard to have a sense of accomplishment as opposed to if you started knocking those littler loans down. And so if you ever need help deciding which one's best for you, feel free to reach out. You can use the link in our description or go to fiscalclinician.com because these things can be really complicated and it's sometimes just hard to decide what plan to get on.
Yeah, and the key takeaway here is like both strategies work, right? The snowball was going to give you those quick wins, while the avalanche may save a bit on the interest, but ultimately we feel behavior wins in the long run, and choose the one that ultimately feels best for your lifestyle.
Yeah, there's instances where the avalanche could save you money compared to the snowball. However, here's the big distinctions I would make. If you're a huge checklist person and you're really motivated by small wins, I think the debt snowball could be the way to go for you. However, if you're incredibly disciplined and consistent and particularly the amount that you're putting towards the loan you don't think is going to change at all, then the avalanche could give you a slightly better edge and advantage mathematically. Just like investing, just start, right? Start making a strategy instead of putting it off because of this decision. With the loans, don't forget these small behavior hacks that make paying off your loans a lot easier. So for example, set up automatic payments for each loan. Now, often with minimum payments, sometimes it's set up automatically to pay out. But what we want you to do is see how much money you could contribute towards those loans. So let's say, you could put $300 a month towards a particular loan and set that on automatic payments as opposed to just a minimum. Sometimes it's helpful to track your payoff visually. You could use an app or a simple chart and that works well. But what my wife and I actually did, I really liked is we took paper clips. We had $110,000 to pay off. And so we literally got 110 paper clips and attached them end to end. And this was our visual for at home. We kept it hanging in our room so we could see it and be like, those stupid paper clips, when are we going to get rid of those? And so we had a visual of every month we would go back to our loan balance and we'd make a payment and then take off a paperclip because each paperclip represented $1,000, right? So I feel like that visual was really motivating and really fun for my wife and I. And so you can get creative with that kind of stuff too. The next thing is celebrate each loan that's fully paid off. You're not going to have more than probably like 10 to 15. That'd be kind of a lot, but it depends on the person. Sometimes there's a lot of small ones. And so when you finish paying off a particular loan, go celebrate. Have a fun dinner with either you and some friends or you and your spouse or significant other. Go buy yourself a little treat yourself gift, right? We're talking $50 to $100, something fun to reward yourself, but not to get completely off track. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, this is so complicated, I wish someone could just help me map this out step by step, it's exactly what we do in our one-on-one coaching sessions. And you can book a free 15-minute consult with me using the link in the description or at fiscalclinician.com.
And we feel it's best the first 2 or 3 years after graduation to really still think like a student, think lean and mean, and be a financial machine, right? Because these first few years of planning, your repayment can completely change your financial future. The best time to always invest in your future self is 100% today.
Yeah, and speaking of investments and just investing in yourself, we wanted to talk briefly about what to do with investing when paying off your student loans. If you want more specifics about this, go back to our budgeting episode 3, and you can see a very detailed layout of everything. But when you're still paying off your student loans or paying off any debt like credit cards and things like that, aside from your mortgage, what we recommend is still investing 5% into either, if you're working, a 401k, or maybe you're still in school, you could put 5% of what you're making into an IRA, a Roth IRA. Most likely that would be the best option. The reason we're saying 5% normally is if you're working your first job, often there'll be some kind of employer match. Usually this is around 3 to 5%. And that's where this 5% number comes from. We want you to take advantage of that free money that the company is matching. So if you do have an employer match, take advantage of that instead of the IRA. However, if you're still studying for the boards or you're not working full-time with benefits yet, then putting something aside for your future still is really important. And that's where you could put 5% into an IRA. But if you're debt-free, then that changes things. And we recommend at least investing 10% of your income at the very minimum. Honestly, if you can do closer to 15 to 20%, that's awesome. But yeah, while you're still paying off debt, trying to set aside 5% helps things to compound and takes advantage of time, but then you can also use the rest of your income to tackle your debts. In terms of repayment strategies, we would urge you to think of these repayment strategies, whether it's state-specific or government-specific strategies, as a bonus. We're going to talk through each strategy, but we want you to think about these things as bonuses rather than your primary payoff plan. And your primary repayment plan for your student loan should come through your income and through the budget that you're creating.
Your paycheck is the most powerful tool to begin paying off your debt. But the other bonus tools out there are the repayment programs. And we feel it's best to start with your monthly budget before you start to focus on these programs. So we're going to dive into 3 of these programs that are out there and available. So the first one is the NHSC, which is the National Health Service Corps. Now, the NHSC provides repayment to healthcare professionals working in health professional shortage areas.
Yeah, and it's important to note these are fixed loan repayment awards, meaning you're going to get a number. It could be 20,000, 40,000, whatever you're agreeing to commit to working in federally designated healthcare professional shortage areas. And you're usually committing to a year, 2 years, 3 years of work in order to get a certain sum of money paid off. Now, again, these awards are tied to service commitments. And so it's not your total loan balance that's going to be paid off. It's not even a percentage. It's a static number. They're not going to cover 100% of your debt. And with this specifically, if you're a PT, OT, it's probably not going to be the best program. And even if you're a nurse, the eligibility is limited to primarily nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives, and psychiatric nurse specialists. And these roles qualify because they function as primary care or behavioral health providers in these underserved communities. So if you're not a part of one of those demographics, probably not the best option to go to. You could always look at those other 2 programs. Another one, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, the PSLF. This is what you normally traditionally think of when it comes to student loan forgiveness. So when people talk about student loan forgiveness, this is usually the program they're talking about. Now, a big thing to note is early on in this PSLF program, there was a 99% rejection rate. So 1% or less got fully approved for this program, which is just unbelievable. The average acceptance now in the 2020s is around 2 to 5%. And so it's still pretty crazy because at the best, 95% of applicants are getting rejected for some reason, and we'll talk about some of the reasons below. This is why we talk so much about making sure that this isn't your primary plan for paying off your loans. We want to make sure that you have a plan with your budget and with your income and using those to pay off the loans because, again, 95% rejection rate's pretty stinking high. And what happens that's unfortunate is many borrowers pay minimums for 10 years or more. During all this time, their interest is accruing, only to then be rejected 10 years later to minor errors. However, the problem is that whole sum of money was gaining interest and becoming bigger as time went on.
Yeah, and a 99% rejection rate is just outright ridiculous, right? But to be fair, their PSLF program can work for some people. So plan on being extremely committed if you're going to dive into this as a repayment option.
Again, it's a great thing to at least look into, but not to depend on. And so let's give a specific example of someone who is counting on PSLF as their payoff plan. And so they didn't pay anything towards their loans. That's what this is assuming, as opposed to at least paying the minimums. But some people do decide not to pay anything because they're like, whatever, the government's going to pay it off, so I'm good. The typical interest rates for these loans right now are around 7 to 9%. So let's just go right in the middle. And let's say a student took out $100,000 in student loans at 8%. And let's say they were hoping for the student loan forgiveness to go through. And so they went 10 years without paying anything. And then they get rejected after 10 years. That $100,000 would have grown to $215,000, which is insane. And if they went to a different program where they were relying on, a 20-year program and didn't pay anything, it would grow to $466,000, almost $500,000, guys. We just want the best for you guys, and we don't want you to fall into the trap of hoping for something that's really statistically insignificant. Student loan forgiveness can be tricky, and here's some of the top reasons that people do get rejected. Some of it is wrong forms. I've heard stories of people making tiny clerical errors on a form, and then 8 years in, that's the reason they got rejected. Another one is partial payments, even if it was a small issue where you were trying to pay whatever needed to be paid, but you didn't pay it in full, even if it was a minimum, they could reject you for that. Other one is improper consolidation of loans. We rarely recommend loan consolidation for student loan repayment, but if you do end up doing it, it can disqualify you for repayment.
Yeah, and the final option that we have to look into is what's called an income-driven repayment.
Income-driven repayment, IDR, the data on this is a little more tricky because the payment period is like 20 to 25 years. And so a lot of people who have applied are still waiting on receiving anything. According to some 2021 data, about 8 to 9% of applicants have actually received forgiveness so far. Again, the numbers are a little wonky because there's so many people who are still waiting. For 2025 data, we see that there's still a backlog of over 734,000 pending IDR applications. And so the big interpretation here, again, we don't have enough data to say, is this worth it? Is this not worth it? But the numbers that we do have are not super encouraging, 7 to 8%. And I think with all of these programs, the percentages are overall pretty stinking low, and we shouldn't really hang our hats on these programs paying off our student loans.
Now, regardless of your interest rate on the student loans and regardless of these programs, the important thing to note here is you need to have a repayment plan in place and a budget. Start with choosing your method, debt, Snowball, or Avalanche. Decide what's best for your lifestyle. Then develop a payment tracking system, submit your forms on time, and double check your eligibility for requirements. The small wins of budgeting can help you pay off your loans in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and once you understand repayment programs, you can start thinking about how to optimize your loans further. Some examples of this include refinancing, and using debt payoff calculators even to accelerate your path to being debt free. And we'll talk about this a little later, but in the description, we left a link for a debt payoff calculator that can be really helpful just for kind of crunching some numbers. And so we talked about consolidation before and how consolidation is rarely good. It usually is a lot better for whoever's doing the consolidation, like the lending company. It's rarely as good for the student or for the graduate. But one thing that can be helpful at times is refinancing your student loans. And this is when you take out a new loan at a lower interest rate.
Yeah, and one thing to note here is if you have federal loans, refinancing them into a private loan can mean losing protections like income-driven repayment or forgiveness programs. If you have student loans that are from private lenders, typically with higher interests, refinancing some of those can save hundreds or even thousands of dollars over time.
It's one of those things that if you are using federal loans, you might decide, hey, I'm not going to try for any of these programs because of the statistics. You could still refinance and get a lower rate if it makes sense. Big rule of thumb, though, don't refinance if you're kind of using the federal protections or federal programs as like your bonus and like, oh, maybe they'll pay this off. Then it probably wouldn't be a great idea to refinance. But if you just have private loans, it could definitely be a good thing to explore to decrease your interest rates. Now, the Ramsey team does a great job of explaining when it makes sense to refinance, and here are some main things to keep in mind. The whole point of refinancing is if you can get a lower interest rate. And for example, like if you can get a 1% or greater drop in interest, this is where it's probably going to make sense to refinance if you have private or if you have federal, but maybe you're deciding to not go down the path of any of those government programs. So again, 1% or more, that's when it's worth it. If you're at like a 0.5% or even 3/4, the juice probably ain't worth the squeeze at that point. The other thing is make sure it's free to refinance with no hidden fees. Oftentimes they can hide things and be really sneaky. And so just be really careful in your research and make sure what you're getting is free. Make sure that you can keep a fixed rate with your loans. The last thing you want to do is refinance. And, during the process, they're like, oh, well, we could refinance you from 7% to 3%, but you'll be on a variable loan. And this is really not a great idea because the loan could then jack up later. You want to make sure the loan is fixed. Variable rates are honestly a terrible idea with student loans and most types of loans. So the last thing we want you to avoid is co-signing. If you need a co-signer to refinance, whether it's a family member, a friend, we would recommend just avoiding that because it just makes things awkward. If, for example, you can't pay your payment and then your mom or dad are in charge of it or your friend's in charge of it, and then their credit starts to get hurt, it's just really not a good idea. So we'd recommend trying to stay away from that.
Some key takeaways for this loan repayment segment is treat budgeting and repayment using your paycheck as plan A. Plan B would be to look into the loan forgiveness and assistance programs. Ultimately, aggressive repayment is the most reliable pathway. The next thing you want to remember is to act early to control your interest. So paying interest during school and tackling the principal right after your graduation can save you tens of thousands of dollars. Also keep track of the current federal rates and see if refinancing can be a great option for you. The last thing is to delay lifestyle upgrades, delay the lifestyle inflation creep and keeping up with the Joneses next door. We want you to stay in that student level mindset for the first few years after graduation, which will ultimately accelerate debt freedom and relieve you of a lot of financial stress. So to make all this easier, we also recommend using a debt payoff calculator. Now, you can plug in your loan balances, your interest rates, and monthly payments to see how quickly you can become debt-free. And this is super fun.
And so we've linked Ramit Sethi's debt payoff calculator in our show notes under the heading resources. And so you can experiment with and start to build your own plan for figuring out how long is it going to take for you to pay off your debts. And seeing the numbers right in front of you really is motivating and just helps a lot. And so in our next episode, we're tackling one of the biggest decisions new grads face. Do you take the higher paying clinic, the one at the mill, seeing a lot more patients, or do you take the one that's going to give you better experience and might be lower volume, but it's a lower paying job as well?
And in the next episode, we're going to break down real world examples like seeing more patients for a bigger paycheck versus slower paced clinics that help you build your skills and experiences and helps you talk through how those choices can impact your career long term.
Yeah, so if you're about to pick up your first job after graduation or you're still a student, this is one episode you're definitely not going to want to miss. Well, thanks for joining us on the Fiscal Clinician Podcast. Remember to rate our podcast, subscribe, and share with a clinician who needs it.